The Goff story. Our family truly began 26 years ago when our first beautiful girl came to us through adoption. First, it is important to explain that ours is anything but a typical family. We have 3 special needs children that God has blessed us with. To start from the beginning, I personally had a dream from the time that I was 15 years old to take the children that nobody seemed to want and give them a real home. I volunteered everywhere that I could, every chance that I got, to work with these special people. I was just so moved by the beauty of their innocence and the desire they had just to be loved and accepted. I came home one day at 15 years old and very passionately told my mother my dream. She stood there and cried, which at the time made no sense to me at all. Later, when I shared that we would seek a special needs child, she stood and cried again. She reminded me of that day when I was 15 years old and said that when I told her this dream back then, she literally had goosebumps cover her for the realization that it truly was to be. She knew this came from God. Then I met and married the love of my life 34 years ago in May of 1986. He did not share my dream. He wanted us to have our own children that were a part of each of us. I wondered a little bit with a guilty heart if I married with selfishness, and if maybe I was supposed to have waited for the man that shared this great desire of adopting special needs rather than marrying for love. However, 7 years passed and Brian and I discovered that neither one of us, together or separately, could conceive a child. This was amazing, since it took the guilt from both of us of being the cause of this great disappointment in our marriage. Brian then suggested that we should seek adoption as an alternative to start our family. He wanted to seek a healthy white newborn. I never mentioned my dream to him since we first married, as I did not believe pressing him into adopting special needs children would be right or fair. It would not likely work out well if we weren't both in it with complete unity. So we sat before the caseworker and described our desire of the newborn we would seek. I had a bit of a heavy heart as I felt like I was letting my Lord down at that moment, but totally unable to figure out how to change things at this stage of our marriage. Just at this moment of speaking a silent prayer, someone stepped in and laid a stack of pictures down on the desk between the social worker and us. After they left, I asked the social worker what those pictures were, if she wouldn't mind my asking. She simply said, "Those are the updates for CAP." I knew what CAP stood for instantly. This meant Children Awaiting Parents. These were the less than perfect children of my dreams. I carefully and silently picked them up and started to look through them as the caseworker and Brian talked. Every time I came to an exceptionally moving child, I would simply nudge Brian and flash the beautiful picture for him to see. On our way home from the caseworker's office, Brian turned to me and asked, "What were all of those pictures you kept showing me in the office?" I quietly told him that they were the children nobody wanted. I sat fighting tears and looking out the window. Then the miracle happened. Brian, quite choked up, asked me exactly what it was I was saying. I told him that these children were born less than perfect and as a result were not the choice of most people. He started digging for more information on what was wrong with each individual child I showed him in the office. I described the cleft palate, the child born with dwarfism, the child that was deaf, and several more. We drove silently for a couple of miles before Brian turned to me, apparently having just regained control, though I hadn't realized it had affected him this much until that moment, and stated, if there truly are children like those out there, we have absolutely no business adopting a healthy newborn. He went on to say that with waiting lists for the typical children, it was clear that there was a better chance for them than the ones in those pictures. This was the day our dreams collided. 13 months later, Bianca came to us. A long time had passed during which we were sure that a child would never come. The emotional roller coaster was almost too much to take of the children we would think we were going to receive, just to find out other homes were chosen due to more experience. Then, 1 hour after our last wound of finding out we didn't get the special little boy with autism, we received the call about Bianca. She was a 4-week-old child born with spinal bifida. She was in surgery number 4, and the doctors were not sure she would live. However, they needed to know if we would accept her if she lived. If so, we were to begin driving to Florida from upstate New York immediately, as she was not medically safe to fly by plane due to the extreme complications with hydrocephalus. I called my husband at work and the journey began. We arrived just 2 days later. We almost drove around the clock while taking turns sleeping. She was crying when we came in. The nurse handed her to me for the first time. Bianca looked up into my face and the crying ceased. It was like instant recognition that I was mommy. She looked at me like, where have you been? She then went on to experience 9 major emergency surgeries in the next year and a half with a lot of complications. We knew every nurse and doctor on our team at that teaching hospital on a first-name basis, and were deeply connected like family at that point. After all, we were in the hospital more than we were at home. 26 years and over 50 surgeries later, Bianca is a brilliant young lady with the most amazing zest for life. She takes nothing and nobody for granted, and clearly has a strong purpose for Christ on this earth. She was our first miracle child. Then 4 years later, we began to search for our next treasure. This time, Christopher came from the other end of our home state, New York City, almost exactly 9 months from the start of our search. He was 8 weeks old and born with Down syndrome. The family that was planning to adopt him backed out because of the diagnosis. So he was in foster care with no family willing to take him. This time, Bianca was able to fly. We felt that going to collect him as a family was very important for bonding reasons. Bianca remembers that day clearly and tells Christopher about it frequently. The biggest part of her memory, however, is how Christopher loaded his britches the moment the plane took off from the ground, and the suffering this led to the entire aircraft to experience until our seatbelts could safely come off. Then we had all kinds of plastic bags offered to us to contain that special diaper. This is our most fun memory of Christopher's arrival. Chris just loves to hear that story. Special Package 3 was the total surprise. We did not think that a surprise could happen when one adopts. We We had the social service department in California call us to ask if we would consider a then 15-month-old little girl for adoption. She heard from us on a YouTube news group for parents with children that have spinal bifida. The foster parents were very intrigued by our story and shared our information with the social worker. So the social worker apologized and hoped we didn't mind her receiving our information, and then proceeded to tell us a little about Lucy. I told her I was deeply flattered that they thought of us for this special gift, but that we couldn't possibly take on any more at the moment. Our hands were quite full with the other two. She then went on to tell me she understood, although Lucy would likely then go between many foster homes until she was 18 years old, and then would likely live in an institution for the rest of her life. Okay, that was a low blow. I blurted out, "Not in my lifetime." I then said I didn't think I could turn her away, but would have to ask my husband how he felt about this. I hung up and called him at work. I repeated what the caseworker said, and he asked me if I said, "When can you bring her?" Obviously, God had us on the same wavelength at that point. We took Brianka and Christopher to California with us to meet Lucy for the first time. We got off the plane, and there she was. She looked identical to me in every way. She was literally a mini-me. Red hair, blue eyes, Wonder Bread complexion. We were shocked, to say the least. Lucy was brought to us at 18 months old. The foster parents flew her out to Texas and delivered her to us. There would never be question that she was meant to be. After all, just look at her. Lucy has been anything but a simple experience. She had major seizures begin a month after we received her. She was on a vent in the intensive care numerous times. We were blessed with an amazing team of doctors that helped us to stabilize her quite successfully. We still have our moments, but our family is a true treasure. We homeschool our children and travel with them every chance we get in order to show them the world around us. Brian and I cannot even remember what life was before these three amazing children. Emotional roller coaster and all, we can honestly say we would not take back one single day! Exclamation point.